Little girl calls wrong emergency number when her mother faints. Few minutes later, a feared mafia boss did this. The fluorescent lights at Joanne's diner buzzed like a swarm of angry wasps as Rachel Morgan wiped down the last table of her second shift that day. Her hands trembled. Not from the icy wind blowing in off Lake Erie and rattling the window panes, but from exhaustion that had settled deep into her bones. 16 hours of standing, pouring coffee, clearing plates, serving cold fries to long-haul truckers and drifters of the night, just to scrape together enough tips to buy her daughter a new pair of winter boots. Heading out, Joanne called from behind the counter, her smoker's rasp softened by warmth. You look like a cat dragged you through the alley and dropped you there. Rachel managed a crooked smile. Just tired. Lily's probably worried sick. I promised her grilled cheese for dinner tonight. Tonight, that was 13 hours ago. Joanne Sihil. Hea tone gentle. Go home to your girl. Rachel. The November wind slapped her face as she stepped outside. Sharp enough to sting. She pulled her thin coat tighter and slipped into her beat-up Corolla. The engine sputtered. Coughed twice before finally catching. Rachel whispered a small prayer that it wouldn't die on her during the 12 short blocks home. The radio hissed between static and faint late-night chatter, blending with the growl of her empty stomach. She tried to remember the last time she'd had a proper meal, maybe yesterday morning. Or the day before that. The apartment building loomed from the darkness, a crumbling relic from the 1950s. Its peeling bricks like the weathered skin of old buffalo still bracing against the lake wind. Rachel climbed the stairs slowly. Every step, heavy as though she were wading through mud. The hallway reeked of old fried onions and damp plaster. Air thick enough to choke. Mom Lily's voice rang out the moment the lock clicked open. The 7-year-old dashed toward her. Braids messy. Front teeth missing. Her smile lighting up the dim little room. You're home, I saved the last waffle for you, Rachel's heart pinched. That waffle had probably been her dinner all day. It's okay. Sweetheart. Mommy's just... The words faltered as the world tilted sharply. Rachel tried to grab the doorframe, but her knees gave way, sliding her to the floor. The last thing she saw was her daughter's face, wide blue eyes filled with terror. Mom. Mommy Lily dropped to her knees, shaking her mother's shoulders. But Rachel lay still on the worn rug, her skin pale as paper. Panic flooded the child's small body. She'd seen this on TV when grown-ups fell and didn't wake up. You called for help, snatching the old flip phone from the table. Her teeny fingers tremble. She remembered the emergency number 911, but in her fear she pressed the wrong keys. On the screen appeared 941, and the call began to ring into the still, frozen silence of a buffalo night. The call rang only twice before someone answered. The room where that signal sounded sat nearly 20 kilometers from Rachel Morgan's cramped apartment, on the top floor of a lavish penthouse overlooking Lake Erie, where the city lights of Buffalo blurred and shivered across the cold water. Dominic Russo was seated at a walnut desk, his white shirt ironed smooth without a wrinkle, a heavy Swiss watch of steel nesting at his wrist. He was reviewing ledgers that no prosecutor dared touch. Outside, night lay hushed, the wind striking the window panes in a steady lash. Inside, the only sound was the soft hiss of whiskey pouring into a glass, when the special phone, the private line reserved for his innermost circle, began to ring. Dominic's brow tightened at once. Only a handful of trusted men ever had permission to call that number. He lifted the receiver, his voice low and cold as steel whispering between his teeth. Who is this? There was a pause. Then a tiny voice, trembling and shattered by panic, came through the line. Please help my mother. My mother will not wake up. I do not know what to do. Dominic froze. A child's voice. Clearly a little girl. He leaned forward, eyes sharpening, the crease between his brows deepening. Who are you? Who gave you this number? A soft sob. I called the wrong number. But my mother fell down. She will not wake up. Please. Seer. I do not know what to do. The sound was not a joke. It was not a trap, nor a trick from an enemy. It was pure, raw desperation. so sincere that it cracked the shell of ice that had been sculpted around Dominic's heart for years. His mind snapped back to 7 years earlier, to a hospital room and the frail voice of Isabella through a nurse's phone saying, "Dad, are you there yet? I am so frightened." And he had not arrived in time. "What is your name?" Dominic asked, his voice losing its chill, roughened instead by feeling. "Lily. Lily Morgan. I am Lily. My mother is Rachel. We are at 42 Elm Street. Second floor. Apartment C. Please come quickly. My mother is very cold." Dominic closed his eyes. That address was in the north side, along the fragile border between his territory and Matteo Castelli's. He should not go there unprepared. But in that instant, every rule seemed meaningless. "Listen to me. Lily, stay with your mother. All right. Do not open the door for anyone except me. I will be there soon." "Are you a cop?" "Sir?" the little voice whispered like wind. Dominic swallowed the lump at the back of his throat. "I am someone who can help. I will get there as fast as possible." He hung up and barked an urgent order. "Frankie. Leo. Upstairs now. Immediately." 2 men appeared within seconds. One broad as a brick wall. The other lithe as a wildcat. "What is it?" Boss Frankie asked. Dominic stood, buttoning his vest, his voice steady. "We have a destination. Elm Street. The north side. A child needs help." Leo shot Frankie a puzzled look. "Are you sure that is Castelli's ground? It could be a setup." Dominic looked at them, his gaze brooking no doubt. "I am not sure of anything, except that if we do not go, a child might lose her mother tonight. And I will not let that happen again." The 3 of them left the penthouse like a blade of cold wind, carrying with them an unspoken promise to a lost past and a fragile hope for the trembling voice of a little girl who had dialed the wrong number. The sleek black Cadillac sliced through Buffalo's empty streets like a ghost gliding through the dark. Dominic sat in the front seat, silent, his eyes sharp and unblinking as they cut through the windshield. Streetlights slid across his face, revealing the hard lines and deep-set creases of a man who had lived too many lives within one lifetime. Frankie drove with perfect focus, while Leo sat in the back, one hand resting lightly on the gun beneath his coat. They asked no questions. They knew that when the boss stayed quiet, it meant emotion was pressing hard beneath a thin layer of ice that could crack at any moment. As they entered the north side, the car slowed. Dominic's gaze swept over the old red brick building that appeared out of the darkness, a place he had never thought he would set foot in again. The steps were chipped. The hallway light flickered, the windows patched with tape. It was a world away from where he had come. He gestured briefly. "Frankie, stay outside. Leo, with me." They moved quickly up the creaking wooden stairs, their footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. Second floor. Apartment C. Dominic stopped before a door left slightly ajar, where a thin slice of weak light spilled out from underneath. He knocked 3 times. Softly. "Lily. It's me. I'm Dominic. I came to help your mother." Behind the door came a silence so deep it made his chest tighten. Then a small voice, hesitant and trembling, asked, "How do I know you're real?" Dominic's lips twitched faintly, even terrified. The girl was cautious. "Because you told me your name is Lily Morgan. Your mother's name is Rachel. And you're being very brave right now." A faint click, and the lock turned. The door opened slowly. The little girl stood before him like a shadow, wearing an old nightgown, her hair tangled, her big eyes red from crying. But what stopped Dominic cold was the look in those eyes, pure, unwavering trust. No suspicion. No fear. Only hope. "Can you show me where your mom is?" he asked. Lily nodded and reached for his hand, her small fingers icy but gripping tight, as if he were the last lifeline she had. Dominic stepped inside the apartment, where time itself seemed to have stopped. The walls were peeling, the couch torn. The refrigerator stood half open and dark, empty of food. Rachel Morgan lay motionless on a thin rug, her face pale, her body frail. Dominic knelt beside her, checking her pulse. Still there. Faint. But there. She fell as soon as she got home. Lily whispered. Mom skips meals so I can eat. Dominic clenched his jaw. Anger, burning deep, not at anyone in particular, but at a world cruel enough to make a mother choose between hunger and love. Leo, tell Frankie to bring the car to the back door. Now. He bent down, sliding his arms beneath Rachel's limp body. The hands that once pulled triggers now trembled as they lifted her with a tenderness that startled even him. Rachel murmured something faint, her eyelids fluttering but unable to open. Lily, I'm here. Mommy. Lily grabbed her mother's hand as they left the apartment step by step. Away from hunger, from cold, from despair. In Dominic's arms, Rachel felt weightless, fragile enough that he feared he might break her with a grip too firm. When they reached the street, Frankie already had the car door open. Dominic laid Rachel gently across the back seat, covering her with his own coat, then turned to Lily. Get in with your mom. Sweetheart, I'll take you both somewhere safe. Lily looked up at him and nodded without hesitation. Dominic Russo, the man who made all of Buffalo tremble, had just broken every rule he'd ever made to save a stranger and her child. A little girl with the same eyes as the daughter he had lost long ago. And he knew, from that moment on, his life would never be the same again. The black Cadillac glided through the empty night, veering off the main streets into nameless alleys where no security cameras watched and no traffic lights flickered. Dominic sat beside the back seat, his gaze fixed on the pale face of Rachel. Unconscious against the worn leather upholstery, Lily sat close to her mother, her tiny hands gripping Rachel's cold fingers. Her wide eyes filled with worry as she looked up at Dominic. He turned toward her, forcing a rare, gentle smile onto a face, long used to hardness. Your mother's going to be all right. Lily, we're taking her to see someone very good. This doctor has helped me many times before. I trust her. And you can too. Lily nodded slightly, uncertainty still glimmering in her eyes. But the fear had eased. The car stopped in front of an unmarked building on the southern edge of Buffalo, a place that looked like an abandoned clinic but was, in truth, one of Dominic's safest sanctuaries where Dr. Blanes, Helen Kim, had spent years quietly treating those who could never show their faces in public hospitals. The door opened the moment Frankie knocked 3 times. The familiar signal. Dr. Kim, a Korean woman in her early 40s, with neatly tied hair and round glasses, stepped out. She asked no questions, merely gestured for Dominic and Leo to carry Rachel inside. She's severely dehydrated. Doctor, Kim said. Her voice calm but firm, blood pressures low, signs of long-term malnutrition. I'll start fluids and monitor her overnight. Dominic nodded, his eyes flickering with something unspoken as he watched Rachel lying on the hospital bed. Her lips cracked, her hollow cheeks drawn from exhaustion. He said nothing, just handed Dr. Kim a thick envelope. She glanced at it briefly before sliding it into a drawer. Asking no questions, Lily stood beside the bed, watching everything with a quiet, almost adult composure. Dominic pulled up a small chair near the bedside and patted the one beside him. Would you like to sit with your mom for a while? Lily hesitated, then climbed onto the chair, eyes never leaving Rachel. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Only the soft hiss of the IV and the steady ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Then Lily turned to Dominic. Her voice, barely more than a whisper. Are you a good man? Dominic froze for a heartbeat. Startled by the simplicity of the question, he met her blue eyes clear as winter water. Impossibly deep for a child. I've done many things that weren't good, Lily, but tonight, I just want to help your mom. So maybe, in some small way, Istilam. Lily thought quietly for a moment before asking again. Why did you help me? I called the wrong number. Dominic looked away, his voice dropping low. Because I once had a little girl, and one night, I didn't make it in time when she needed me most. He drew in a slow breath, steadying himself against the weight of memory. This time, I didn't want to be too late. Lily said nothing more. She simply leaned her head against her mother's arm. When Dr. Kim returned to check on them, the little girl had already fallen asleep, her hand still clutching Rachel's. Dominic stood, pulling the thin blanket up over them both. He watched them for a long moment, his gaze softening, something fragile breaking through the armor that had encased him for years. "Let them stay here tonight," he said quietly to Dr. Kim. "I'll come back in the morning. Call me if you need anything." Before leaving, he bent down and gently smoothed the tangled hair from Lily's forehead. "Sleep well, Quito." She didn't stir, but the corners of her lips curled faintly, as if in her dream she'd heard him say it. Dominic stepped out of the room, closing the door with a sound no louder than a breath. As he walked down the dim hallway, something strange stirred in his chest. Perhaps it was peace. Perhaps it was the memory of what he'd lost. Or perhaps it was the beginning of something he never believed could exist again. Soft morning light filtered through the pale gray curtains, coaxing Rachel's eyelids to flutter open. The faint scent of antiseptic, the clean linen beneath her, and the steady hum of the IV machine gradually pulled her back into consciousness. She turned her head slowly, her mind hazy, her throat dry and burning as if she hadn't tasted water in a week. Her eyes landed first on Lily, fast asleep in the chair beside the bed, her small head resting against Rachel's arm, her face serene, untouched by the world's cruelties. A hot tear welled up in Rachel's eye, slipping free before she brushed it away. She remembered collapsing the moment she got home, her legs giving out, her daughter's terrified cry echoing through the blur. And then, what a dream. Maybe a man's voice, deep and sorrowful, hovering at the edge of memory. Footsteps approached quietly. Rachel turned toward the door just as it opened, and there he was. Dominic Russo. He wore a charcoal coat today, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his eyes as dark and still as a deep lake. When his gaze met hers, it was softer than she ever expected. "You're awake," Dominic said gently, keeping a respectful distance. "Lily's fine. She just fell asleep. It's been a long night." Rachel tried to sit up, wincing as the IV line tugged against her arm. Dominic moved to help, but she instinctively flinched back. Where am I?" "A private clinic," Dominic replied evenly. "My doctor's. You were dehydrated. Exhausted. You need rest for a few days." Rachel glanced around. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too private to be an ordinary hospital. Who brought me here?" Dominic met her gaze steadily. "I did. I was the one who got Lily's call. She dialed the wrong number. Instead of emergency services, she reached me." Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. "You? Why you? Who are you?" He hesitated for a moment, then stepped back and sat in the chair opposite her bed. "My name is Dominic Russo." Her brow furrowed as she searched her foggy thoughts. That name familiar. Too familiar. Then, like a blade cutting through fog, the truth struck. Rachel froze, her voice cracking with fear. Russo, not the Russo who runs the Mafia in Buffalo. Dominic didn't look away. "Yes." Silence filled the room, dense enough to choke. Rachel's gaze darted from him to her sleeping daughter, then back again. Her breathing quickened, panic rising. Why would someone like you come to save me?" Dominic didn't move, his voice steady, his eyes holding hers. "I don't know the exact reason, only that when I heard your little girl crying on the phone, I remembered mine. She called me once, too, and I didn't make it in time." Rachel's fingers clenched the bedsheet so tightly, her knuckles turned white, as if letting go might make the world collapse. "You think that gives you the right to walk into our lives? You think one act of kindness erases everything you've done?" Dominic tilted his head slightly, his tone calm but edged with sorrow. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came because Lily needed help, and I helped. She called the wrong number." "Dominic, you can't use that to cling to us." Rachel tried to keep her voice firm, but fear trembled beneath it. "I know exactly what men like you are capable of. My mother used to lock the doors every night because of the Russo family. I won't let my daughter grow up in that kind of world. Dominic nodded faintly, as if he had expected every word. You're right. You have every reason to be angry, to refuse. But at least, let her rest. Just one more day. After that, I'll step away if that's what you want. Rachel said nothing. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She turned toward Lily, who slept peacefully, her small hand wrapped around her mother's as if afraid to lose her again. Rachel realized that no matter what she said, in her daughter's eyes, Dominic Russo wasn't a crime lord. He was the man who had come when no one else did, and that more than anything was what frightened her most. Torn between fear and gratitude, between right and wrong, Rachel Morgan didn't know whether to run or stay a little longer. But she knew one thing for certain from this moment on. Her life and her daughter's would never be the same again. 3 days after leaving Dr. Rella Rubold, Kim's clinic, Rachel and Lily returned to their small apartment on Elm Street in silence. There had been no conversation during the car ride. No goodbye at the end. Dominic had kept his word. He didn't appear again. Didn't call. Didn't send a single message. But that didn't mean he was gone. The next morning, when Rachel opened the door to fetch the paper, she found a brown paper bag neatly placed on the doorstep. Inside were fresh milk, a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, and a bar of Lily's favorite chocolate. No name. Rachel frowned, carrying the bag into the kitchen, her chest tightening with unease. She asked Lily if anyone had knocked or left something outside, but the little girl just shook her head, still busy playing with her worn-out stuffed rabbit. That day, Rachel didn't go to work. Dr. Kim had told her to rest for at least a week, but rest meant no paycheck, and no paycheck meant trouble. Every expense had to be weighed carefully. Every coin mattered. When she checked her wallet, there was barely $50 left. By evening, as she was about to fry the last few slices of potato left in the cupboard, the doorbell rang. Rachel froze. No one ever came by this late. Peering through the peephole, she saw no one. When she opened the door, there was only a small bag of medicine and a sealed envelope on the floor. Inside the bag were children's cough syrup and a few packets of cold medicine. The envelope held $75 in cash and a small printed note from a friend. Don't worry. Rachel stood motionless in the hallway. She didn't need to guess who it was. Dominic Russo hadn't shown his face, yet his presence filled every corner of her apartment. She was angry not because he had done something wrong, but because he was doing the right thing in silence, leaving her no way to reject him, no room to push him away. Each morning, something new appeared at the door. A children's storybook wrapped carefully in brown paper, a box of cookies Lily had mentioned during dinner, even a few wildflowers pressed between the pages of a book with a note that read, "For the days that need a smile." Rachel tried to ignore them all. She said nothing to Lily. But Lily was different. The child never asked who the gifts came from, as if she already knew. Each time she found something, her eyes sparkled, her innocent smile spreading like the first warmth of spring. Once, Rachel overheard her whispering to her stuffed rabbit, "Mr. Dominic is nice. He didn't forget us." A few days later, as Rachel was counting the last of her money to pay part of the rent, Mr. Kowalski, the building manager, knocked on her door. The quiet old Polish man looked awkward, scratching his head as he held out an envelope. "Someone's already paid your rent. 3 months in advance. Cash. No name left. Just asked me to give you this." Inside was a receipt and a folded note. The words printed in bold italics. No one should have to choose between food and shelter. From a friend. This time, Rachel couldn't hold it in. She shut the door and leaned against the wall, the paper crumpling in her trembling hands. She didn't want pity. She didn't want saving. And yet, deep down, she knew that without those unseen acts of kindness, she and Lily would once again be battling hunger, cold, and an empty refrigerator. She looked over at her daughter sitting at the table, humming softly as she colored, her small world untouched by the fear her mother carried. Lily didn't know about money, about mafia families, or about the ghosts Rachel fought each night in silence. All she knew was that someone Somewhere, it was watching over them present, even if unseen. And perhaps, in a world so full of imperfection, a hidden friend like that wasn't such a terrible thing after all. It began as nothing more than a vague unease, like a thin wisp of smoke curling through the cracks of her mind, too faint to grasp yet heavy enough to unsettle her. At first, it was just the fleeting glance of a stranger on the sidewalk, then the sound of footsteps lingering too long outside her door when she drew the curtains at night. One morning, while Rachel was feeding Lily breakfast, she heard the rumble of an engine outside idling, then cutting off, but no one got out. She stepped onto the balcony and saw only an old blue pickup parked across the street, its windshield half covered with yellowed newspaper. After a few minutes, the truck rolled away, not fast, but just slow enough to make her feel like someone was waiting for something. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe she was just tired, too many sleepless nights, too much worry, too much fear since the name Dominic Russo had entered her life. But small things began to pile up. At the supermarket, a man in a baseball cap followed her down every aisle. When she stopped at the cereal shelves, he stopped too. When she turned suddenly toward the frozen section, he changed direction without hesitation. Only when she pushed her cart out the door did he finally veer off. Buying nothing, Rachel had clutched Lily so tightly her arms ached, her heart pounding like a warning drum. Another morning, while Lily played in the courtyard behind their apartment, Rachel watched from the balcony. A man in a long coat stood at the far corner by the wall, his back turned. He wasn't smoking, wasn't on the phone, just standing there in that strange, the motionless way that made no sense. When Rachel called out for Lily to come inside, the man disappeared, gone as if he'd melted into the air. That night, as Rachel washed the dishes, her own reflection stared back from the small mirror hanging above the sink. But it wasn't her reflection that made her heart freeze. It was the shadow moving behind her in the window's faint light. A quick, soundless shape, gone almost before she turned. She ran to the back door and threw it open. But outside there was nothing but the trash bins and the brittle wind stirring the dry branches. No one. No sound. No trace. Only her pulse hammering in her throat and Lily trembling in the doorway, her voice small and scared. "Mom, what's wrong?" Rachel forced a calm smile, telling her she must have imagined it just a shadow from the trees. But that night, she didn't sleep. One question kept looping through her head. Was this the price of crossing paths with Dominic Russo? Was someone watching her now, not out of mercy, but as leverage, or a warning? Or worse, Dominic had said he wouldn't interfere. But since when did men like him keep promises the ordinary way? He was Dominic Russo, the kind of name that made people bolt their doors. And if he was the faint light that had once protected her, then these shadows creeping closer must be the ones drawn to him. Rachel thought long into the night. The next morning, she walked Lily to school earlier than usual, gripping her daughter's hand so tightly. It was as if letting go for even a second meant losing her forever. On the way home, she looked over her shoulder more than 10 times. No one followed, but the feeling didn't fade. It was the feeling of someone who had already lost too much, who now lived with the dread of losing again. Standing before the bathroom mirror, Rachel looked into her own eyes. They were sunken, dark-ringed from exhaustion, but her gaze had hardened. She whispered to her reflection, as if to make a vow. If someone is watching me and my daughter, they'll learn that I'm no longer the woman who collapsed that night. And if they dare touch Lily, I won't sit still. Inside her, fear was transforming into something else, something raw and fierce. The instinct of a mother ready to do whatever it took to protect the one reason she still breathed. And in the reflection staring back at her, Rachel no longer recognized the woman she used to be. The night in Buffalo was colder than usual, and every gust of wind that hissed through the cracks of the apartment windows sounded like a warning Rachel couldn't quite decipher. She had just tucked Lily into bed, the little girl curled under her thin blanket, clutching her worn, stuffed rabbit close, her face peaceful, as though the world outside had never fractured. Rachel stood by the window, a cup of tea warming her hands, her gaze drifting over the empty courtyard below. No strangers, no suspicious cars, yet tension coiled inside her chest like a living thing, tightening with each breath. She was about to turn away when the lights went out. A sharp pop from the fuse box, and the apartment plunged into absolute darkness. Rachel gasped, the cup slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. Before she could react, the back door burst open. 2 figures stormed in fast. Masked. Silent. One grabbed her in an instant, a brute force pinning her against the wall. Rachel fought back, clawing at his arm, screaming for her daughter. Lily awoke to the noise, startled and terrified. But before she could even stand, another man had seized her, hand clamped over her mouth, hoisting her up like a rag doll. No! Rachel's scream tore through the dark, raw and desperate. Lily, don't hurt her, please, please. She's just a child. The cloth gag cut her words short, the taste of dust and fear filling her mouth. Plastic ties bit into her wrists until she could no longer feel her hands. Lily struggled weakly in the kidnapper's grip, tears streaking her cheeks, eyes wide with horror as she reached for her mother. Outside, often waited. No plates, no markings. The doors slammed shut, sealing them in. Rachel and her daughter were thrown onto the back seat like cargo. One man sat beside them, gun in hand. Another drove, his face hidden in the rearview mirror. The engine roared to life, cutting through the night, and Rachel's trembling breaths mingled with Lily's muffled sobs. She didn't know what was happening, or who had orchestrated it, but deep down, she understood this was no accident. This was a message, a threat, and only one name echoed through her mind: Dominic Russo. Time inside the van stretched endlessly until it finally veered off the road and onto gravel. Through the tiny window slit, Rachel saw overgrown fields, the faint outline of abandoned warehouses left to rot since the Cold War. The van screeched to a halt. Rough hands dragged her and Lily out into the cold. Move, one man barked, shoving them through a rusted metal door into a dark room lit only by a flickering bulb. Stay quiet. You don't scream. You don't fight, you live. His voice was sharp, soulless. Rachel pulled Lily into her arms, whispering against her hair, forcing calm into her voice, though her body trembled. I'm here. Sweetheart, I'm not leaving you. Close your eyes. Don't be afraid. We'll get through this. The metal door slammed shut, plunging them back into the dark. Rachel shook not from the cold, but from helplessness. She had thought herself strong once. I thought she could stand against anything. But now, with Lily's tiny body pressed against hers, she felt like a leaf caught in a storm, too vast to fight. Then gunfire shattered the silence. 1 shot. 2. The metallic clang of impact. Shouts. Then a dreadful stillness. Rachel held her breath, clutching Lily so tightly she could feel her heartbeat against her chest. The door flew open, flooding the room with harsh light. A tall figure filled the doorway, black coat, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. Rachel. The deep, steady voice pulled her back from the edge of panic. Dominic Russo stepped into the room, his gaze locking onto the mother and child huddled on the floor. Rachel couldn't speak. She could only stare, shocked, trembling, disbelieving. Dominic crossed the space between them, lowering himself to one knee. It's over, he said softly. You're safe now. I'm taking you home. Rachel let him lift her to her feet. Lily threw her arms around his neck without hesitation, her voice breaking. I was so scared. Dominic's face hardened for a moment, then softened again as he held her close. You're safe now. Little one, no one will ever touch you again. On the drive back, Rachel sat silently in the back seat, Lily asleep in her arms, her eyes never straying far from Dominic. He said nothing, his hands gripping the wheel, his expression carved from stone. For the first time, Rachel wasn't sure whether this man was her savior or the reason the nightmare had begun. But one truth pressed deep into her heart, undeniable and terrifying in its tenderness. He had come, exactly when she needed him most. And in that single moment when he held Lily, the look in his eyes betrayed everything his reputation could not erase. A man like Dominic Russo could never be only a monster, but he could never be only a man of mercy either. The armored SUV pulled away from the crumbling warehouse and melted into the misty dawn that hung low over Buffalo. Rachel sat motionless in the back seat, still trembling from the aftermath. Lily had fallen asleep against her shoulder, her breathing soft and steady, as though the nightmare had already faded into some faraway dream. Dominic sat in the front, silent, since the moment he turned the key. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Every now and then, through the rearview mirror, he glanced back, his expression a mix of anger, concern, and something deeper, unnamed. When Rachel realized they weren't driving toward her neighborhood, she leaned forward, her voice hoarse. "Where are we going?" Dominic didn't look back. "Somewhere safe. Your apartment isn't secure anymore. Not after tonight." Rachel's tone sharpened. "You can't just decide that for me. I have a life, a job, a choice." Dominic exhaled, low and weary. "A choice. So you'd choose to go back to that apartment where your daughter was almost taken. Choose to wait for whoever sent them to try again, Rachel. This isn't a game. Someone targeted you and your child to get to me, and I'm not letting that happen again." Silence fell over the car as they drove along the lakeside roads, passing rows of old mansions half hidden behind bare maple trees. The gray morning light shimmered faintly on the surface of Lake Erie, silver and solemn like a mirror. When the SUV finally stopped in front of a large stone house, Rachel's breath caught. The place looked like something out of an old film, high roof lines, thick wooden doors, a porch swing swaying gently in the cold air, and a back garden that opened toward the water. White curtains fluttered in the windows, serene and unreal. "You're awake," Dominic said when he noticed Lily stirring. The little girl rubbed her eyes, looked out the window, and gasped softly. "It's so pretty." "Are we staying here?" Dominic nodded. "For now, until things settle down." Rachel didn't move. "I can't stay here. This is your house. It's not my world." Dominic turned then, meeting her gaze. "No. It's the safest place I can offer. You don't have to stay forever. But I won't let Lily live through another night like that. No matter how much you hate me, that's one thing I won't allow." Lily pushed open the door and hopped out, unable to contain the excitement of stepping into what looked like a fairy tale. Dominic signaled to Frankie, who was waiting at the entrance, to carry their small bags inside. Rachel stepped out slowly, her movements hesitant, her eyes scanning the surroundings as if looking for a reason to refuse. "We don't need your charity," she murmured. Dominic's reply came quietly, steady as steel. "And I'm not offering charity. I'm taking responsibility." Rachel met his eyes, torn between defiance and the faint, unwelcome comfort blooming inside her, a fragile sense of safety she couldn't deny. Inside, the house was unexpectedly warm. Walnut floors gleamed beneath the soft light. A fire burned bright in the hearth, and the air carried the scent of baked bread and coffee. Lily darted from one room to another, her laughter echoing faintly. "Mom, look, there are picture books and a piano." Rachel watched her daughter's joy, then glanced toward Dominic. In his world, one carved from power, shadow, and fear, her child had somehow found a pocket of light. And though her heart still ached with doubt and wariness, Rachel Morgan understood one thing with absolute clarity here. In this unfamiliar house, with this dangerous man who had stepped between her and the darkness, she and Lily had found something they hadn't known for a long time. A quiet night, a place to breathe, a fragile chance to begin again, even if it was only temporary. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in the small room overlooking the lake, Rachel stood quietly in the upstairs hallway. Moonlight streamed through the window, spilling across the wooden floor in pale ribbons that shimmered like smoke. From downstairs came the sound of a piano, slow, mournful, each note hanging in the air like a memory searching for its way back home. Rachel descended the stairs, stopping at the doorway. Dominic sat at the piano, his shoulders shifting with every key he pressed, his face turned toward the fire flickering in the hearth. The cold, commanding man the city of Buffalo feared was gone. What remained was someone playing only for the echo of his own emptiness. When the music stopped, Rachel spoke softly. "That song, it's so sad." Dominic lifted his head, eyes still lost somewhere far away. A faint, almost wistful smile touched his lips. It was Bella's favorite. Rachel stepped closer, sitting down on the chair across from him. "Bella, for a moment." Dominic said nothing. Then his voice emerged, rough and low, as if pulled from a wound that had never healed. "My daughter, she was 7 when the accident happened." He stared down at his hands, the firelight tracing every scar and vein across his skin. "I had everything once: power, money, loyalty. None of it could save her. They called it an accident, but it wasn't. It was a warning. A bomb planted under the car that was meant for me." His voice caught, and Rachel stayed silent, listening only to the soft crackle of the fire. "My wife died instantly. Bella lived, for a few minutes. They told me she was still conscious, that she called my name through a nurse's phone. I could hear her voice tiny, trembling. 'Daddy, are you coming?' I drove like a madman through the night. But when I got there, his breath faltered. There was only a white sheet." Dominic's eyes drifted, lost in a memory too sharp to fade. "I promised her I'd always come when she needed me. But I didn't keep that promise." Rachel's hands folded together tightly in her lap. She didn't interrupt, afraid even a whisper might break the fragile bridge between past and present that his words had built. A long silence passed before he spoke again, his tone quieter now, heavy as fog. 7 years later, on a night just like that one, I heard that voice again. A small, trembling voice over the phone. "My mom won't wake up. Please help us." And I knew, Rachel, I knew I couldn't stay still another time. He turned toward her then, eyes deep and weary. "I didn't save you out of pity. I saved you because when I heard that little girl crying, I heard Bella. You can think of me as a criminal, a man who brings fear wherever he goes, but that night, I was just a father who didn't want to break his promise again." Rachel lowered her gaze, her heart heavy. For the first time, she saw the man behind the name. Everyone whispered in fear. Not a monster, but someone who had already lost everything, yet kept on living only to redeem a broken vow. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Thank you. Feels too small. And I'm sorry doesn't fit. But I understand now." Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then his tone softened. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that Lily is safe. That's enough for me." He stood, adjusting his coat slowly, then paused at the foot of the stairs. "Rachel, there are things in this life we can't undo. But sometimes, God gives us a second chance to do right what we once did wrong. For me, that chance is the little girl sleeping upstairs." Rachel watched his silhouette fade into the dimly lit hallway. In the stillness of the house, only the sound of the wind moving over the lake remained, and the fire still burning in the hearth, casting against the wall the flickering outline of a broken father, carrying within him the last, enduring spark of a love that would never die. In a rundown bar buried deep within the abandoned industrial district of West Buffalo, the yellowed lights cast a sickly haze over dried bloodstains, and the thick fog of cigarette smoke hanging in the air. Matteo Castelli sat in the farthest corner, his corner where no one dared to sit without invitation. He wore a dark brown leather jacket stretched across broad shoulders, his hair cropped short, his eyes cold enough to make even the drifters nearby avert their gaze. On the table before him lay a thin file, a single name stamped on the front, Rachel Morgan. Matteo flipped through the pages slowly, his mouth curling into a cruel smirk. He paused longest on a photograph, Rachel, holding her daughter's hand as they left the schoolyard, her gaze tight, cautious, as if she could feel invisible eyes tracking her every move. Matteo tapped one thick finger against the edge of the picture, then glanced up at the man standing nearby. "This is the woman." The underling nodded. She and the kid disappeared after the kidnapping attempt, moved out of the apartment on Elm Street. Gone. But someone spotted Dominic Russo in the area that same night. Then they both vanished. Matteo leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. savoring the words like a familiar flavor newly spiced. He's hiding them. Of course he is. Dominic never sticks his neck out for anyone, unless he let out a low, humorless laugh, opening his eyes again. Unless the woman means more to him than he's willing to admit. He took a slow sip of whiskey, then rose, the file dangling from his hand. Start with the girl, the kid, find her school, her friends, her routine. Keep tabs on the mother from a distance. Don't touch them, not yet. Just make sure Dominic knows I'm watching. The underling nodded once and left without another word, leaving Matteo alone with his thoughts. He turned toward the cracked mirror behind the bar, studying the reflection that stared back at him. It was the face of a man Dominic Russo had once pushed off the board, once the right hand of the Castelli family in New York, now reduced to running shadows in Buffalo. He hadn't forgotten. Dominic had taken his reputation, his position, and the brother he had loved more than his own life. And now, Matteo saw the opening he had waited years for. Dominic had made a mistake. He had revealed a weakness, a woman, a child, and in their world, weakness was a death sentence. In the days that followed, Rachel began noticing the old signs returning. The same silver car parked near Lily's school more than once. A man watching from across the street, not approaching. Never close, but always gone the moment she turned to look. Fear began seeping back into her bones. She told Dominic. He didn't speak for a long time after listening, only sat in heavy silence before suddenly standing and making a call. Rachel heard the name Salvatore, and the clipped precision in his tone, each word like a bullet. Whatever he said, it left no room for argument. That night, Dominic stood alone on the balcony overlooking the lake. The wind whipped his coat, the gray strands of his hair shifting in the chill. Rachel stepped beside him, saying nothing. He was the one to break the silence. Matteo Castelli, he said quietly, his voice edged with steel. He's back. Rachel didn't know the name, but the way Dominic spoke, it made her skin prickle. He's the one who planted the bomb that killed my daughter, Dominic said, eyes locked on the horizon. And he won't stop. Rachel gripped the railing, her voice trembling. What do we do? Dominic turned to her, his gaze shadowed yet resolute. We keep the girl safe, at any cost. And this time, I won't let him take anyone else from me. From the darkness beyond the lake, an unseen war began to stir silent, deliberate, merciless, and Rachel, whether she wanted to or not, had become a piece on a deadly chessboard between two men bound by old wounds and debts written in blood. The afternoon light in Buffalo melted into a soft, golden haze, and Lake Erie shimmered with faint ripples that seemed to breathe in the waning sun. Rachel stood by the living room window, her eyes following Lily as the little girl played in the garden with the shaggy hunting dog Dominic had sent over that morning. The child's laughter rose and fell with the wind, a sound so pure it made Rachel's chest tighten. She exhaled softly, trying to steady the emotion, caught somewhere between gratitude and unease. She had been living in the mansion for nearly a week now. Each day passed in strange, almost fragile peace, so calm it frightened her. Safety was not something Rachel Morgan had ever been allowed to trust, especially not when a man like Matteo Castelli was still out there, waiting in the dark. But what unsettled her most wasn't the enemy lurking beyond those walls. It was Dominic Russo. Since the night he had spoken about his daughter, Dominic had withdrawn behind a quiet distance. He still appeared for dinner at the same hour, still spoke politely, still treated Lily with gentle patience, but between him and Rachel stretched a silence too thick to name. The piano no longer played. The little notes he used to leave on the table were gone, and those fleeting glances, the ones that lingered just a second too long, had vanished as if they'd never existed. Dominic had built a wall, and this time, he was the one refusing to cross it. Rachel hated the feeling. She didn't know why she cared. She should have been relieved, thankful, even for the distance that gave her time to think, to remind herself that they came from opposite worlds. But somehow, it was that very distance that made her realize she didn't want to leave. Not because of the house, or the security it promised, but because she had seen the truth behind the man who guarded it, a shattered heart still learning how to love again, and she could no longer pretend that didn't matter. That afternoon, while Lily napped, Rachel walked to the desk where Dominic usually sat reading the paper each morning. Her eyes rested on the telephone for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly as if arguing with her own resolve. At last, she picked up the receiver. A woman's voice answered on the other end, calm and precise. "Good afternoon. Mr. Russo's office." Rachel swallowed hard. "Please, tell him Rachel's calling." There was a pause, then the click of a line transferring. 1 heartbeat. 2, and then his voice came through low, measured, faintly surprised. "Rachel," she took a breath. "We need to talk." An hour later, Dominic entered the living room. He placed his coat neatly over a chair but didn't sit. His posture was straight, his eyes unreadable. "I thought I'd given you enough space." Rachel rose to face him. "And I used it to think." Her tone steadied. "Dominic, I'm not a child. I know who you are. I know what people say about you. I know you're not clean, not simple, not safe. But I also know something else." He said nothing. His gaze locked on hers. Rachel took a step closer. "I know no one forced you to come that night. No one asked you to care for my daughter as if she were your own. No one told you to hide your pain so that we could breathe a little easier. You chose to do all that not for power, not for debt, but because you saw something in Lily, and I saw something in you." Dominic tilted his head slightly, his voice softening. "What do you see?" "Rachel." She met his eyes without flinching. "I see a father who still knows how to love, a man who hasn't completely lost the part of himself that's human. And I can't walk away from here without telling you, I'm ready to hear the truth. All of it." Dominic exhaled, the sharpness in his expression easing for the first time in days. He sat down beside her. "The truth isn't pretty, Rachel. It's covered in blood and regret, and choices I can never undo. But if you want to hear it, I'll tell you. From the beginning, I want to know," she said quietly, "because if I don't understand who you are, I'll never understand why my daughter trusts you so completely, or why I'm starting to as well." Outside, the last trace of daylight slipped below the horizon, leaving a silver sheen across the lake. Inside the quiet house, 2 people sat facing each other, not to confess, not to justify, but to finally stop hiding. And for the first time since fate had collided their worlds, their conversation began, not in fear, but in truth. Inside the quiet living room, only the ticking of the clock and the soft amber glow of a small table lamp filled the air. Dominic sat leaning forward, his hands clasped tightly between his knees, his eyes searching Rachel's face for any flicker of reaction after he had finally told her everything the years soaked in violence. The blood-stained choices made to survive in a world where kindness was a liability. Rachel said nothing for a long while. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sweater. Her expression no longer frightened, only thoughtful, conflicted, as if her heart and mind were waging a silent war. At last, Dominic spoke, his voice low and deliberate, each word heavy with control. "I can protect you and your daughter, not just for now. I have people, places, ways that no one, not even Matteo Castelli, could ever reach you. You wouldn't have to be afraid anymore." Rachel lifted her head, her eyes deep and unreadable in the dim light. "You mean living under the protection of a mafia boss trading freedom for safety?" Dominic didn't flinch, didn't deny it. He nodded slowly. "I know I can't change what I've done, but the present, that I can control. If you let me, I can make sure you and Lily live without looking over your shoulders every day." Rachel rose and walked to the window. The night had swallowed the lake outside. Bare trees shivered in the wind, turning the landscape into a painting of cold. Quiet, melancholy. She spoke softly but with a firmness that cut through the silence. "You know how I've lived, Dominic. 16-hour shifts at a diner, counting every tip just to feed my daughter. I know what fear feels like. I know what helplessness is. But I also know one thing. I don't want my child to grow up in a world where safety comes from the guns hidden under a man's coat." Dominic closed his eyes briefly. as if the weight of her words pressed against old wounds. When she turned back, Rachel's gaze was steady. Resolue, I'm grateful for everything you've done. Truly. But I can't teach Lily to believe in what's right while I'm surviving on what's wrong. He said nothing. There was no anger, no defense, just exhaustion flickering behind his eyes. Rachel stepped closer. Her voice gentler now. I don't think you're a bad man, Dominic. I think you're a man who made the wrong choices for the right reasons. But that's your path, not mine. I want to teach my daughter how to stand on her own feet, not to hide behind someone powerful. Dominic stood as well. The space between them was barely a breath. He looked at her as if trying to memorize every line of her face. So, you're leaving? Rachel hesitated, then nodded. Yes, but not because I'm afraid. Because I need to face life on my own. He lifted a hand, as if to touch her, then let it fall. His voice dropped to a near whisper. If you ever need anything at all, you just call. Rachel's smile was faint but full of meaning. I know. And knowing that is what gives me the courage to go. In that moment, there was no victory. No defeat. Only two people who had found each other when the world was collapsing. Now choosing to walk separate roads. Not out of anger, nor out of regret, but because they both understood something most never do sometimes. Love means knowing when to let go. The morning Rachel left the mansion, the mist still clung low over Lake Erie, and the first rays of sunlight were only beginning to filter through the bare branches along the roadside. Dominic didn't try to stop her. He walked her and Lily to the car in silence, his eyes as still and deep as the cold water behind him. Rachel held her daughter tightly on the back seat, feeling the small, fragile warmth in her hands, the only thing that had kept her from breaking these past few weeks. They found a small apartment near Eden Valley Market, just a few blocks from Lily's new school. There were no guards, no cameras, no stone walls or men posted at the gate, only a second-floor walk-up with a creaky wooden door, a refrigerator that groaned when it started, and the sound of neighborhood children running down the hall. To Rachel, it was freedom, a fragile, uncertain kind of freedom, but freedom all the same. For 2 days, life was almost ordinary. She woke early, walked Lily to school, then worked part-time at a bakery nearby. In the evenings, they did homework together, read bedtime stories, and fell asleep to the hum of the city outside. Rachel didn't call Dominic, and he didn't call her, yet deep inside, she couldn't shake the quiet pull that drew her thoughts back to the house by the lake, the strange warmth of that place, and the man who had stood like a storm between her and the world. On Tuesday night, Rachel was washing dishes while Lily worked at the dining table. The power went out without warning. The apartment fell into darkness, broken only by the dull amber glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. Rachel froze, heart hammering. She checked the fuse box. Everything was fine. Then a chill, sharp and familiar, crawled up her spine. When she turned back toward the kitchen, Lily was pressed against the wall, eyes wide. Mom, there's someone outside the window. Before Rachel could react, glass shattered behind her. A heavy crash. Then the back door burst open. 2 figures in black stormed in, swift and precise like predators. One grabbed Rachel, yanking her backward. She screamed, twisted free just long enough to snatch a paring knife from the counter and slash across his arm. Blood splattered her sleeve. The second man lunged for Lily, clamping a hand over the child's mouth. No, don't you touch her, Rachel shouted, her voice raw with terror. She fought like an animal cornered, but her strength was no match for theirs. They slammed her to the floor, her cheek pressed against the freezing tile. Then came the sound that split the night, the screech of brakes outside, followed by the thunder of a car door slamming. The front door exploded inward. Dominic burst through like a force of nature, a gun steady in his hand, his eyes burning with cold fury. There was no warning, no hesitation, just the crisp, merciless crack of a single shot. One man dropped beside the table, blood blooming across the tiles. The other barely reached for his weapon before Dominic struck him down with a precise blow to the throat. He collapsed. Motionless. Dominic didn't speak. He crossed the room, knelt, and lifted Rachel from the floor. Her body trembled uncontrollably as he wrapped an arm around her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Voice low but shaking with restraint. Tears spilled down Rachel's face, not from fear, but from the unbearable truth that even after she had left, he had never stopped watching over them. Lily broke free from her corner, ran to her mother, then turned and wrapped her small arms around Dominic's neck. "You came," she whispered. "I knew you'd come." Dominic nodded, holding both of them close. "No one will touch you again," he said quietly. "I promise." By the time the police arrived 10 minutes later, Dominic was gone. No footprints, no trace, only a shattered apartment and the unspoken truth that peace would never come easily to someone like Rachel Morgan. When dawn broke, she sat in the hospital room as a doctor examined the shallow cut on her shoulder. Dominic stood in the corner, silent, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging beneath. Rachel looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Castelli." He nodded once. He wanted to send a message. "But from now on, I'll be the one sending them." Rachel didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. She knew that after tonight, there would be no turning back for either of them. The quiet war that had begun in the shadows was no longer waiting. It had already arrived. Under the pale hush of early dawn, Dominic didn't return to the lakefront mansion. Instead, he moved quietly through the nearly deserted streets of Buffalo, the night wrapping around him like a kind of armor. He knew Matteo Castelli wouldn't stop, not after this. Every step, every call, every movement was calculated, nothing left to chance. Dominic reached out to the only federal agent he trusted, a man he'd once worked with indirectly. Years ago, when survival demanded uneasy alliances, through a secure channel, Dominic began feeding him information, the locations of Castelli's warehouses, names of his lieutenants, shipment schedules, and the web of corruption that had kept the empire standing. Every file was precise, every number verified, every timestamp cross-checked. Dominic never set foot inside an FBI office, never gave a name. But what he provided was enough to ignite a full-scale operation. For the next few days, Rachel knew none of this. She and Lily stayed in their small apartment, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy. She still glanced through the curtains sometimes, still felt the faint pressure of eyes that might or might not have been there. But now, our fear carried a key at defiance. Somewhere deep down, she sensed Dominic's invisible presence, like a shadow between her and the world's danger. From afar, he watched over them. Occasionally, a message reached her phone, brief, coded, ensuring her safety and reminding her which routes to avoid. Meanwhile, Dominic continued his private war, tracing Castelli's financial records, tracking shell companies, and collecting evidence of arms trafficking, drug routes, and money laundering. He mapped the organization in full, the guards at each warehouse, the drivers, the routes, the timing of every delivery, and passed it all to the agent in clean, silent precision. He attended every meeting from the dark, never revealing his face, never claiming credit. Yet those who worked with him knew they were dealing with someone whose knowledge of Castelli's empire was absolute. And as the FBI prepared, Dominic timed everything: the raids, the communications, even the silence before impact, with the cold perfection of a man who had lived too long in the shadows to ever miss. When the morning of the operation came, fog rolled thick across the city. Teams moved in simultaneously across Buffalo's industrial zones, storming the warehouses that Dominic had marked weeks before. Guns and drugs were seized. Files and bank ledgers were confiscated. Matteo Castelli and his core men were captured alive, surrounded before they could fire a single shot. Dominic stood at a distance, watching the flashing lights from a quiet overlook near the harbor. It was clean. No blood spilled except the blood that justice demanded. The empire that had haunted his past collapsed in silence. Rachel and Lily never knew the details, only that, somehow, the unease had lifted. The men who once lurked near their street were gone. The air itself felt lighter. When the city returned to calm, Dominic went back to the mansion by the lake. The mist still clung to the water, soft and silver in the morning light. He stood by the window, hands in his coat pockets, watching the reflection of the sky ripple across the surface. For the first time in years, there was no one left to fear, no loose ends, no debts unpaid. He didn't seek thanks. He didn't call Rachel. He simply breathed in the cold air and let the silence settle. For once, he had fought without destroying, had used the rules of both worlds, his and theirs, to protect what was pure. And as he looked out over the quiet lake, Dominic Russo finally understood that this fragile peace bought through shadow and sacrifice was not redemption. But it was something close, something worthy of the promise he had once failed to keep, to his daughter, to himself, and now, to them. Morning broke over Buffalo, with soft silver light stretching across the surface of Lake Erie. The glow filtered through the tall windows of the mansion, illuminating polished wood floors and the faded portraits of a long-gone family. Dominic stood on the balcony, one hand resting on the cold iron rail, his eyes fixed on the still water below. The memory of Castelli's capture replayed in his mind, with the slow precision of an old film. The danger was gone, at least for now. But Dominic knew better than anyone that peace in his world was always fragile. Behind him, Rachel stepped quietly into the light. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, her voice soft and uncertain. "Is it really?" Over Dominic turned to her. The lines of his face were harsh in the morning light, yet his eyes carried an unfamiliar warmth. "Yes," he said, his tone steady. "It's over. They've been taken down. Every one of them. The threat is gone. And I'm not saying this to comfort you, Rachel. I'm saying it because I intend to keep you and Lily safe. Always." Rachel exhaled, her relief tempered by caution. She glanced toward the living room where Lily sat on the rug, laughing as she played with her stuffed rabbit. Dominic followed her gaze and nodded slightly. "Look at her. She's happy. She's safe not just today, but from now on. That's a promise I will keep." Rachel looked back at him, caught between gratitude and awe. There was something disarming about the man who could make an entire city tremble yet kneel to comfort a child. He extended his hand, just a small gesture, but filled with quiet conviction. She reached for it, and in that simple touch passed a wordless understanding, a vow. Fragile yet real. Lily ran over and threw her arms around Dominic's leg, her voice muffled against his coat. "Uncle Russo, you won't leave us." "Right." Dominic knelt, his large hands enveloping the girl as he smiled faintly. "No, little one, I'm not going anywhere." Rachel's heart tightened at the sight. For the first time in years, she understood that safety wasn't just the absence of danger. It was the presence of someone who would stand in front of it for you. Outside, the morning unfolded in quiet harmony. Birds sang in the bare trees, and gentle waves lapped the lakeshore. Dominic and Rachel sat together on the porch, watching Lily chase her own laughter across the grass. The world, for once, seemed weightless. Dominic spoke of ordinary things, weather, books, the bakery she loved. His voice softened, and his gaze lingered on Rachel, as if testing the air between them, searching for a place where words could rest. Rachel realized then that beneath his power and scars, Dominic Russo was a man rediscovering the shape of tenderness. And she, somehow, had become part of that rediscovery. He rose, running a hand through his hair as the breeze stirred around them. "Rachel," he said quietly, "if anything ever happens again, I want you to remember this. My promise isn't made of words. It's made of action. Enjoy the calm, but never take it for granted. Peace may be fragile, but it's the most precious thing we'll ever have." Rachel met his gaze and nodded, her smile faint but sure. She knew they had reached a new chapter, one built not on fear, but on trust. Dominic Russo was no longer just a name whispered in the shadows. He was their protector, their anchor, by the lake, beneath the thinning mist. 3 figures stood together, hands intertwined, hearts steady, a family, born not from perfection, but from survival, faith, and the unspoken promise that this time, love had come to stay. The days that followed at the mansion by Lake Erie unfolded in a rhythm both strange and tenderly familiar. The fear that had once gripped the house began to fade, replaced by quiet laughter, and the sound of small footsteps echoing through its wide halls. Lily, after nights of tears and nightmares, started to smile again. Her blue eyes sparkled with that boundless joy only children can hold. Her laughter carried across the grass as she chased the wind along the lakeshore. Rachel often sat in the living room armchair, a warm cup of coffee resting between her palms. Watching from the window, on the rug near the fireplace, Dominic and Lily crouched side by side, assembling a Lego tower piece by piece. Dominic Russo, the man whose very name once silenced rooms, now hunched forward, sleeves rolled up. His expression softened into something almost boyish. Every so often, he smiled quietly when Lily clapped her hands in delight. And for Rachel, that sight was both strange and profoundly moving. It was impossible to deny. Her heart stirred, caught somewhere between disbelief and a fragile kind of peace. For all the fear she had once felt, Dominic had built a world where her daughter could breathe again, a place where laughter was not something borrowed, but something real. One golden afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the lake and painted the room in amber light, Lily ran to Dominic and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Second Dad," she said, her voice small but certain. "I love playing with you." Rachel froze for a moment, the words catching her off guard. Her breath trembled in her chest. Dominic blinked, visibly taken aback, then smiled faintly and held Lily close. "I'll always be here, little one," he said softly. "But you have to promise me something too. You have to learn to be brave, to protect yourself." "Okay," Lily nodded solemnly, her tiny hand gripping his much larger one with absolute trust. Rachel watched them, her heart swelling and aching all at once. Her daughter had found a protector. Yes, but also something more, a presence, a father figure, the kind of steady warmth Rachel thought she'd never see again. Each day followed with quiet routines that felt like fragile gifts. Breakfasts where Dominic sat patiently helping Lily butter her toast. Afternoons where he taught her how to tie her shoes, or laughed softly as she showed him a new drawing. Evenings where he wiped her tears after a bad dream, whispering calm until she slept. Rachel noticed everything: the way he knelt to her child's level, the gentleness in his tone, the unspoken care in his smallest gestures. Despite the world he came from, inside these walls Dominic had carved out something rare, a sanctuary. Sometimes, as she stood on the balcony watching them, Lily's laughter, Dominic's rare, easy smile, Rachel felt her defenses slipping. The man she had once feared was no longer just a protector. He was becoming part of her life, part of the fragile balance she and Lily had fought to rebuild. One evening, as Lily ran toward her, cheeks flushed with excitement, she tugged Rachel's hand and declared proudly, "Mommy, Dominic is my second dad. He's always here." Just like a dad should be. Rachel looked at her daughter, then at Dominic, who stood quietly behind her, his eyes warm but unsure. Something inside her shifted. The trust Lily had given him so freely was something Rachel herself had begun to feel slowly, carefully, but undeniably. Family, she realized, wasn't only built from blood. Sometimes it was forged from the people who stayed, the ones who showed up when the world turned dark, who protected, who healed, who loved without asking for anything in return. Dominic knelt beside Lily, resting a hand on her shoulder. "And I'll never leave you," he said softly, looking up at Rachel as he spoke. "That's my promise." Rachel's eyes blurred with tears. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The promise hung in the air, solid and gentle, as the golden light outside melted into dusk, and in that moment between Lily's laughter, the calm shimmer of Lake Erie, and the quiet rhythm of three hearts learning to beat in sync, a different kind of family was born. Not by law or lineage, but by love, trust, and the courage to begin again. Rachel sat alone on the balcony of the lakeside mansion, watching the silver ripples of Lake Erie shimmer under the fading afternoon light. The air carried the scent of pine and cool water, the kind of stillness that almost felt earned after too many storms. Down below, Lily was running across the lawn, her laughter bright and boundless, her tiny hand clutching Dominic's each time she ran too fast. He slowed his long stride to match hers. Patient, protective, Rachel could hear their laughter drifting upward, blending with the hush of the waves. And for a fleeting moment she felt something she had nearly forgotten: peace. But peace, she knew, was never free. It was not a gift handed gently by life. It was bought with sleepless nights, with terror, with the price of survival. It was written in the bruises they no longer spoke of, and in the quiet, haunted strength of the man now standing in her garden. Dominic Russo, the man whose very name once echoed through Buffalo like a warning, was using all that darkness, all that violence and pain, to keep them safe. And that safety, Rachel realized, came at a cost she could never repay. She drew in a deep breath, the cool air stinging her lungs, and pulled her sweater tighter around her shoulders. The life she once knew, the endless diner shifts, the late nights in her cramped apartment, the exhaustion that came with a strange sort of freedom was gone, irretrievably gone. Every time she imagined going back, the thought drowned beneath waves of fear and futility. There was no before to return to. There was only this new, fragile existence balanced between shadow and sanctuary. Each step she took through this house, each soft glance Dominic gave Lily, every quiet act of care, reminded her that their old world had ended. Out there, beyond these walls, danger still breathed, but inside, within this improbable shelter, Dominic had built something that resembled safety, a world where her daughter could laugh without flinching. And Rachel knew now that to preserve it, she would have to accept everything that came with him: the power, the secrets, the unspoken violence that lingered behind his calm. She looked down again. Dominic was kneeling to listen to something Lily was saying. His face softened, though his eyes still carried that constant, watchful edge, a man who never stopped scanning for threats even as he smiled. It was both comforting and terrifying. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and warmth of the evening wash through her, the rhythm of Lily's laughter, the low hum of Dominic's voice, the sigh of wind over the lake. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel it fully. Safety, however temporary, was real. And with that realization came clarity. From now on, every choice she made would be for Lily's happiness, Lily's protection, whatever it took, however much of herself she had to give up. She would do it. That meant staying close to Dominic. That meant learning to trust a man forged in violence, but softened by love. She could no longer live in the illusion of independence that once defined her. The nights of weary solitude and hollow pride were over. Peace had a price, and Rachel was ready to pay it. For her daughter's smile, for the chance to breathe without fear. Opening her eyes again, she watched Dominic lift Lily into his arms, spinning her once before setting her gently down. The sunlight caught in Lily's hair, in Dominic's eyes, and for the first time, Rachel didn't question any of it. The fear was gone, replaced by something steadier, deeper faith. She would stay. She would learn this new life, this new world. She would accept its danger, its cost, and its fragile beauty. Because sometimes, she realized, peace isn't about returning to what was lost. It's about choosing what must come next. As the sun sank low, the lake turned to gold, reflecting the silhouettes of three figures standing together, an unlikely family, forged in survival and bound by unspoken love. And in that light, Rachel understood even fragile peace is worth every sacrifice, every choice, and every heartbeat it takes to hold on to it. A calm morning poured through the wide windows of the mansion by Lake Erie, soft golden light gliding across the polished wooden floors, warming the quiet air. Rachel stood by the balcony, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching Lily run barefoot across the grass with Dominic. The little girl's laughter echoed between the trees, her tiny hands clutching his as they spun together under the pale sunlight. Birds sang in the distance, and the lake breeze carried the scent of water and new beginnings. Dominic bent down as Lily squealed with delight after finding a small wildflower, his eyes glimmering with a quiet joy he hadn't felt in years. After so long spent in shadows of power and pain, Rachel exhaled softly, a peaceful smile curving her lips. She realized then that true peace wasn't the absence of danger, but the presence of safety, the knowledge that those you love are alive, laughing, and free. In that fleeting, perfect moment, she understood something. Deeper life will always hold chaos and uncertainty, but kindness, trust, and love can build sanctuaries even within the storm. Sometimes, those sanctuaries are shaped not by perfection, but by people who have learned to protect instead of destroy, to heal instead of harm. Dominic, Rachel, and Lily, a family unbound by blood, yet whole in every way, had found one another through fear, courage, and the quiet strength to keep believing. They reminded us that love doesn't always come from where we expect it, but from the small, steadfast acts of care, honesty, and devotion that bring light into even the darkest corners. Later that morning, Rachel watched as Dominic sat on the sofa, reading aloud to Lily, her head resting on his shoulder. The sunlight touched their faces, and in that stillness, Rachel saw something profoundly human, proof that courage, sacrifice, and tenderness still exist, even in a world that so often forgets them. She knew then that as long as love and compassion endure, there will always be light to guide us through the dark. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Underworld Love Stories. Like and share to discover more moving tales each day. We'd love to hear from you. Did this story move you? How did it connect with your own life? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments so we can listen to your stories from the heart. Thank you for watching, and may you carry peace, strength, and joy with you each day. Until next time, take care, and we'll see you again in our next story.